Sometimes a transition into a new era needs a grace period. One could consider Virginia metal band Lamb of God's now 10th best album, their self-titled from 2020, an example of that. It introduced Art Cruz into the groove of a band who'd stayed in that pocket together unchanged for 20 years, while also attempting to make that kind of transition during a global pandemic. I also think it's a textbook example of a band executing a transition like that in the most standardized fashion. Even if it's a point of criticism that I've brought up nearly every time I've talked about the band in recent years, with the release of its follow-up a few years ago, Omens, I think that sentiment rings all the more true, considering how much Art Cruz's style feels better melded into the avenues the band decided to travel throughout its runtime. While still a bit more on the idiosyncratic side, its tone sidesteps within their style, and tighter runtime gives it this immediacy that I think puts it at least a step above the bottom of their discography. It's shy above their top still, but I'd say it's their 7th best album. To keep the direct comparisons on the table for just a minute longer, the best point of growth between this and their last can be seen within both lead singles, Checkmate and Nevermore, both lyrically within the political sideswipes the band has been throwing out there for most of the career, but there's an approach to creating this new notch in the belt that ends up a tighter spin on the latter. Checkmate's got a decent drop, the solo in the intro is a neat moment, but moments like the transition into its first breakdown feel a bit clumsily pieced together. That ruin/laid to rest ass-spoken intro of Nevermore that drops in after that meaty riff, which gives way to this desert groove before a stomping chorus, while having moments that are a bit more on the nose, at least makes for a tighter listen, that I think leads into Vanishing following after splendorously. Maybe it's because the album had some other turmoil in its later production and mixing steps considering COVID, but the lighter engineering staff that is seen on Omens might have been a bigger help for it too. The mix on their self-title felt like the weirdest version of a band taking the Slayer Meshuggah approach to album construction, a weird iteration that might have also brought a bigger glare into their new edition. Omens has its ideas that feel wrought from its predecessor, which could also be a byproduct of Art's playstyle. Since the drums still have this punch of its introduction, it's just the rest of the band that feels snugly wrapped around his brand of intense breakdown carrying. From To the Grave's twang-filled breakdown to the immediate throttling of Ditch afterwards. Another moment that lyrically helps keep the grim tone, but blunt and poignant criticisms in place. It continues within the speedy blending of trademark melodic riffs and triplet chugs across ill designs in the title track, where that bleak tone the group has been carrying gets pushed even further globally. There are stretches of this that sound like the band haven't missed a step. The album also finds its own way around the bend with some fun twists that I think help push them into tangents that they slide into pretty well, like the penultimate old hardcore punk blendings within Grayscale and Denial Mechanism that get swiftly pivoted into the 6-minute grand finale of September Song. One more moment for the band to throw a very on-brand, if not still packed with a few fun swerves, styled showstopper. Lyrically acting as a standoff, I enjoy a lot of the ideas in the pot, but I'd argue its weakest components are some of the more genre-forward pieces, like its breakdowns. It doesn't result in necessarily their weakest closer, but when the band has bowed out on some of their personally strongest songs, I will admit it's not sitting close to those ranks. Even if it's got moments of laurel resting, I do think Omens and its pivots stick the landing better than on the band's now 8th best album, Resolution. Resolution in hindsight came at one of the most stable points in the band's career. They were planning their second record with producer Josh Wilbur, who helped reanimate the band on Wrath, and I can admire the band choosing to not do what I'd argue they did on a record like Sacrament and create a more derivative version of their previous outing. That's not to say it falls far from their proverbial tree, but that honestly might be the album's biggest problem. The band has moments where they mix up their own formula, but it's in ways both big and small that land in a smattering of worlds that lead to some awkward moments track to track. Sure, I love how the band typically opens their albums with a bit more of mood setting, but I think the fact that Straight for the Sun does in fact drop you straight into the heat of this meaty groove is something that I also just mentioned loving about Omens. The way that it also bleeds into a more atypical for the band's sound within Desolation also helps put the listener further into the pocket incredibly well. The lead single Ghost Walking following that, throwing a few smaller wrenches into the mix, I think keeps the pacing fresh. Moments like the clean vocal-led Insurrection and the bass-heavy number 6, where the groove gets absolutely thick in a way that I'm pretty into, unfortunately melt away into the acoustic instrumental Barbarossa, which is a better representative of the clumsier component I mentioned. I think it and the closer King Me act as neat ideas for the band to toy with, but ultimately stand a bit harshly amidst moments like the harmony guitar leads on the groove of Terminally Unique, or the pummeling groove of the penultimate Visitation. It's got moments like Cheated, where the band comes to that more derivative approach as a whole that may not come up often throughout the project, but still weigh it down nonetheless. It's an album I could see redacting someday in retrospect, but I think in its current state, it's a bit of a mess. Foundations are everything for any band, but when you're a band like Lamb of God, who I've already made comparisons to bands like Slayer or another band in the same breath, Fear Factory, who very much keep it idiosyncratic, they run it if it ain't broke, don't fix it, while adding little flair here and there, the Foundation feels all the more integral. And their debut under this moniker, I would still say, is their 6th best album. New American Gospel started this millennium by creating this benchmark that the band has built upon to brighter horizons, while simultaneously acting as a gold standard that exemplifies this band building the most bare-bone but still visceral version of the group that I think sits above where they're leaving us with Omens. The raw production helps sell that foundational sense this album is chugging along with too. That breakdown on Black Label is nuts. But the pairing of the gritty guitars and Chris's punchy groove production are the skeleton that this group would blossom from for the next 20 years. It reads like a scathing dissection of discrimination on top of that gets pushed against even harder on its follow-up, A Warning, which shows the band immediately having a grasp on sonic identity. That foundation building here also acting as a bridging of world of sorts, considering things like the riff construction and vocal style within Letter to the Unborn and overall sonics on Pariah sound like the band finding a way to bridge their Burn the Priest era into a world of its own. Lyrically, those pieces also lean into that same grim energy of that era, but evolve upon it pretty strongly. Moments like the drum and bass intro build on Confessional, and harmony leads on the subtle arts of Murder and Persuasion that give way to the firm, intense groove, or the stomping evolution across the closer ODHGABFE really sound like this adolescent version of the band that would basically shape my teens and still feel like a fun record to respin in hindsight, in the same way any classic debut does when it comes to showing a band in their genesis that I think still makes it worth it for people wanting to get into the band, or in hindsight if you're getting into the band. Yes, this still may sit more in the middle of their ranking, but similarly to a band like Mastodon, Lamb of God have made records that I'd argue for what they're trying to do as a unit do so much better than their roots, and in some instances are some of my personal favorite albums in their respective lanes. Even if they might be landing under that benchmark to me, on their latest, I wouldn't count them out. Given just how solid Omens still ended up being, it showed the band would still create some bangers, and even step back into their own proverbial groove gracefully, even 22 years down the line. With that being said, that's about all I have to say about Omens and where I think it sits within the Lamb of God discography. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts on Omens or Lamb of God if you like the band in their current state in the comments down below. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. I've got a classic album breakdown from an album from the 80s dropping tomorrow. I hope that you're excited about that. Either way, I'm going to go. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys are good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day. And that's because I've just played that game with a little bit of everybody. Oh, you fucking prick. You prick. I like how you have a win number or letter for fucking winning with a grapple. That's fucking funny. Oh, fuck. Getting close. No. Oh! Did that hit him? Did that hit him? What the fuck? Oh, no! I can't believe I did it. Woo! We beat Ryu. I'll put my name in, baby.
This will remind you of me in the fight. Got your ass handed to you, Ryu, after you handed it to me time and 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 time again. Look at Ken being so happy. Man, I hope nothing bad goes wrong for that guy. Spoilers, things go very wrong for that guy.